Your Grace instructed me to deliver this.
You have.
Tell him I am not interested.
Tell her I will double it. The secretary wrote it down. Crossed the room. Placed the note on the table beside the woman's hand. The way one places something near a sleeping cat, carefully, with no expectation of gratitude. She read it. She picked up her own pen. She wrote 4 words, turned the paper, and pushed it back. The secretary carried it to the Duke. I said, "No, Your Grace." The Duke read it. Read it again. Set it down on his desk with the particular gentleness of a man who is not feeling gentle, who is in fact feeling something he does not have a name for because it has not previously been necessary to name it. "Tell her," he said slowly, "that no one has ever said that to me." The secretary, who had worked for this man for 11 years and valued his continued employment, wrote it. I carried it. Place it. She read it. She looked up at the window, not at the Duke. Outside, the February street was the color of old pewter. Vendors moving through sleet, a dog sitting in a doorway looking philosophical. She watched it for a moment. Then she wrote, and turned the paper, and pushed it back without looking at him at all. The secretary carried it to the Duke. I know. That is the problem I am trying to describe. Her name does not matter for the purposes of this story. What matters is what she was. The senior copyist for a map-making firm on Cheapside that produced navigational charts for the Navy, and before that the daughter of a cartographer, and before that a child who had lost her hearing to fever at the age of 9 and had subsequently become, in the quiet that followed, the most precise reader of visual information in a room that she had ever entered. She read lips when she chose to. She chose to less often than people assumed. She found most conversations disappointing once she could fully hear them. She had been hired to authenticate a set of Pacific charts that the Duke had purchased at considerable expense from a Portuguese dealer, because the Navy surveyor who should have done it had died in December, and she was the only person in London who had authenticated Portuguese cartographic work of that era and period without error. She had come to his house in Grosvenor Square on a Monday morning. She had examined the charts. She had written him a report, 3 pages, precise and unambiguous, that concluded, 7 of the 9 charts are genuine. 2 are not. The forgeries are charts 4 and 7. The tell is in the longitude notation. The Portuguese convention changed in 1791, and these charts use the post-1791 notation on paper that predates 1789. Whoever made them was expert, but not expert enough. I would not pay for them. I would instead report the dealer, whose name I recognize from a case in Lisbon in 1817. He had read this report and sent a message asking her to come back. She had come back. She had authenticated 2 further charts. She had written another report. He had sent another message. She had written back, I have completed the work. There is no further work. I am returning to Cheapside. He had sent, I will pay triple your rate. She had written, that is not the issue. He had sent, name the issue. She had written, I have other clients and a workload and a life, Your Grace, and you have now consumed 11 days of it. I am glad the charts are resolved. Good day. He had sent for his secretary and said, find out everything about her, which was the thing he did when a situation required understanding and he did not yet understand it, and which had always previously been sufficient. What the secretary found, she was 28. She had worked for the map firm for 6 years, and before that for the Admiralty in an unofficial capacity that several senior officials preferred not to have documented. She lived in 2 rooms above a bookshop in Bermondsey, which she shared with a large gray cat and approximately 400 reference volumes. She had no family in England. She had turned down 3 previous commissions from houses of equivalent standing to the Duke's, for reasons that her employer, when carefully approached, described only as, she takes the work she finds interesting and declines the work she doesn't, and I have learned not to argue with her about it because she is right more often than I am. She had been offered 6 months ago a permanent position with the Admiralty, official, salaried, with a title and an office and the kind of institutional respectability that most people in her profession would have wept for. She had declined. The secretary reported all of this to the Duke, who listened with his hands flat on his desk and his eyes on the middle distance. "What does she find interesting?" he said. "Apparently, Your Grace, problems that haven't been solved yet." The Duke sat with this. "Then, tell her I have one." She came back on Thursday. The sleet had become actual snow, thin and unconvinced, and she arrived in his library with wet boots and a leather satchel, and the expression of a woman allocating her time carefully and already calculating whether this was worth it. He had arranged the room with the maps on the large table. Not the authenticated ones, those were filed, but a different set. Older. Stranger. A set of charts he had inherited from his father that depicted a stretch of coastline that matched nothing in any atlas he had subsequently consulted. His father had believed they showed a harbor, somewhere in the South Atlantic, that would make the current trade route 20 days shorter. His father had spent considerable money and one ship finding out that they did not, or that if they did, the chart was not accurate enough to navigate by. The Duke had put them away. He had taken them out occasionally because they were the one thing his father had cared about that wasn't power or money, and he found he could not throw away the record of what a man cared about, even if the man was gone. She stood at the table and looked at them for a long time without touching them. He watched her. He had a talent for watching people without making them feel watched, which was one of the more useful things about being the person everyone else was watching. It made you effectively invisible. She was reading the charts the way he had seen no one else read charts. Not with the eye moving, but with the whole face tilted slightly, taking the image in its entirety. Then she leaned down close and looked at a single notation in the bottom left corner, and her expression changed. She straightened. She wrote on her notepad, tore the page, put it on the table between them without looking at him. "Where did these come from?" He wrote, "My father. Purchased in Lisbon, 1798. He believed they were genuine." She wrote, "They are. That is the problem." He wrote, "What do you mean?" She looked at him for a moment with an expression that was not soft and was not warm but was, he thought, honest. The way a person looks at you when they have decided to say the true thing because it is the only thing worth saying. She wrote, "The harbor exists. Your father's navigator was looking in the wrong place. The chart is oriented to magnetic north, not true north, and nobody noticed because the notation is in a dialect of Portuguese that hasn't been used since 1760. I have seen one other document that uses this dialect. It is in the Naval Archive in Lisbon. I wrote a paper about it in 1819 that nobody read." He stared at the note for a long time. Then he wrote slowly, "You knew this when you came in." She wrote, "I suspected it when I saw the paper stock in your original commission. I confirmed it 30 seconds ago." He wrote, "Why didn't you say that immediately?" She looked at him. Then I wrote, "I wanted to see if you were the kind of man who needed to be told things slowly." He read that 3 times. Then he wrote, "Am I?" She thought about it with a seriousness that suggested she was genuinely consulting her own experience and not being polite. Then she wrote, "No. You are the kind of man who has never needed to be told things at all, because everyone around you rushes to say everything before you ask. Which means you have probably stopped asking. Which means there are very large gaps in what you actually know." He sat back. The fire crackled. Outside, the snow had given up, and the street was just wet and dark and ordinary. He had been a duke for 14 years. Before that, he had been the heir, which was its own kind of impossible architecture. He had sat across tables from prime ministers and admirals and the representatives of foreign governments, and not one of them had said anything to him that felt as specifically true as what this woman had just written on a torn piece of notepaper in his library on a Thursday evening. He wrote, "Stay. There is more here than the harbor." She wrote, "I know. I have 3 other clients." He wrote, "I will compensate them for your time." She wrote, "That is not within your power." He wrote, "Everything is within my power." She looked at him. Something moved across her face. Not anger. Something more interesting than anger. Something that looked at him the way a surgeon looks at a particularly instructive problem. She wrote, "That is precisely what concerns me about you. And she put her pen down and picked up her satchel and left. He did not sleep that night. This had not happened to him before. Not this version of it. The kind where the wakefulness is not worry or planning or grief, but something that keeps turning a single sentence over and over like a stone in water, wearing it smooth, finding new angles in it. That is precisely what concerns me about you. Not, you are too powerful. Not, I am afraid of you. Not even, you are arrogant, which people sometimes thought privately and never said aloud. Concerns. As if he were a problem she was working. As if she had looked at him the way she looked at the charts, taking him in entirely, tilted slightly, reading what was actually there rather than what was supposed to be, and found something that required solving. He sent no message the next morning. This was unusual. He was aware of it being unusual. He read her paper on the Portuguese dialect instead. He had his secretary locate it from the Naval Archive. It had been filed unread under Miscellaneous Submissions 1819, and he read it at his desk in the early morning with his coffee going cold beside him and the particular quality of February dawn coming through the tall windows, thin and precise. She was right about everything. The dialect, the navigation error, the harbor. The paper was not written for an audience who needed things explained slowly. It assumed its reader was capable of following without signposting, and it was beautiful for that reason the way a well-made tool is beautiful. No excess, nothing decorative, every word doing the work of exactly that word and none other. He thought, she has been saying true things into empty rooms for years. He thought, I have been in rooms full of people saying nothing for the same years. He thought, I do not know what to do with this, and that is also new. He went to Cheapside. Not with a message. Not with his secretary. He went alone on foot, in the kind of coat that a moderately prosperous merchant might wear, which his valet had produced from somewhere with no explanation and no visible surprise, because his valet was a man of comprehensive practical intelligence who communicated primarily through wardrobe choices. The map firm was on the second floor of a building that smelled of linseed oil and paper sizing, and the particular dry warmth of rooms where precision work happens in quantity. He climbed the stairs. He found the office. She was at a drafting table by the window, working on something large. A coastal survey. He could see from the doorway the kind of painstaking grid work that required the hand not to shake. She was working with her right hand and holding her place on the reference with her left, and her entire body had the quality of deep attention, the quality of a person who has found the thing that uses all of them. She did not hear him come in. This was, he understood, not a rudeness or an oversight. It was simply true. He stood in the doorway for a moment and watched her work, and something happened in his chest that he was not going to examine in a doorway on Cheapside. He knocked on the door frame. She looked up. Her face did the thing it did when it was being honest, still evaluating, not performing a reaction. She looked at him. She looked at his coat. Something in her expression suggested she had made a note of the coat. She reached for her notepad. He held up a hand, reached into his own pocket, put his notepad on the edge of her desk and his pen beside it. He wrote, I read your paper. She looked at it. Wrote why? He wrote, because you said nobody did. She looked at that for a moment. Then, that was not an invitation. He wrote, I know. It was a fact that seemed like it should be corrected. She wrote, you came to Cheapside to correct a fact. He wrote, I came to Cheapside because I have been thinking about what you said and I would like to understand what you meant. She wrote, I meant it precisely as I said it. He wrote, I know. I would like to understand it anyway. What concerns you? Specifically. She sat back. I looked at him with a surgical look. Then she took the notepad and wrote for longer than she usually did. 4 or 5 lines, and turned it. A man who has never been refused anything does not know what he actually wants. He only knows what he has taken. These are not the same thing. When you ask me to stay, you are not asking because you need me. You are asking because I did not immediately agree, and that is a novelty, and novelty in powerful men wears off. I have no interest in being a novelty. I have work to do. He read it. The fire in the small office grate popped and settled. From the street below, A vendor was calling something, the words blurred by distance. He wrote slowly, "What if I could prove to you that you are wrong?" She wrote, "About which part?" He wrote, "The part where I only want what I cannot have." She wrote, "How?" He wrote, "I don't know yet." That is an honest answer. She looked at it for a long time. Then she looked at him. He held the look without filling it with anything, without explanation or persuasion, or the smooth machinery of a man accustomed to getting what he wants. He just looked back and let her read whatever was actually there. She wrote, "That is the first honest answer you have given me." He wrote, "I have been honest every time." She wrote, "You have been accurate every time." That is different. He sat with this. Then I wrote, "Yes." "All right. Yes, it is." She did not agree to anything that day. She returned to her survey and he left, and she did not watch him go. Or if she did, he did not see it because he did not turn around, which cost him something, and he was aware of it costing him, and that awareness was itself new. He came back the following week. And the week after. Not with commissions, with questions. He had been going through his father's papers, the journals and letters and surveying notes that surrounded the charts, and he brought her his findings the way a student brings work to be checked. And she corrected him when he was wrong and confirmed him when he was right, and wrote, sometimes, long marginal notes in a hand that was cramped and fast and covered more ground per inch than anyone he had ever read. He was not performing patience. That was the thing he had to sit with in the evenings, alone in his house that was enormous and full of things he had never chosen. He was not performing anything. He was genuinely interested. In the charts. In the problem. In the way her mind moved across a problem like a key finding its lock, without friction, without wasted effort. In her. He understood, sometime in the 5th week, that what he had never wanted before was this. Not compliance, not agreement. Not the smooth yes that everyone around him had been producing his entire life like a coin from a sleeve. He had wanted, without knowing he was wanting it, to be in a room with someone who was completely themselves, who had not adjusted themselves to suit him, who would, without drama, without cruelty, simply and finally, say no. And then say, "That is the problem I am trying to describe." He told her this. Not in person. He wrote it at his desk at midnight, in a letter that was 4 pages and honest in the way that midnight letters are honest, the way that darkness makes the true thing easier because there is no face to arrange while you say it. He sent it the next morning, before he could revise it into something safer. She wrote back in the afternoon. 1 page. He read it standing in his hallway with his coat still on. "I have been thinking about what it costs a person to only ever be agreed with. I think it is a tax that collects slowly. You pay it in the parts of your mind that stop asking questions because the answer is always yes. You have more of those parts than you know. I have watched you realize things across this table that you should have realized years ago, and I do not say that cruelly. I say it because watching it happen has been, against my better judgment, quite extraordinary. You are someone who should have been argued with for 30 years. You are only now getting the invoice. I do not know what to do with that either. To be plain, I am telling you so." He stood in his hallway for a long time. Then he sat down on the floor, which was undignified, and read it again. The harbor, when they found it, through a Portuguese naval contact she had maintained since the Lisbon paper, who had read it, who had been one of perhaps 3 people in the world who was real. The charts were accurate. The navigation correction was exactly what she had said it was in the library on a Thursday in February, as if it had been the simplest thing. His father had been right. He had simply not had the right person beside him. He told her this in the letter he wrote after the Portuguese contact's confirmation arrived. She wrote back, "Your father would have found me eventually. He sounds like a man who did not stop asking questions. I am sorry you lost him." He had not told her he missed his father. He had simply described him, over the weeks, in the detail that accumulates when you go through a dead man's papers. The handwriting, the margin notes, the places his attention snagged. She had read it all and understood what it said underneath. He wrote, "I would like to ask you something, and I would like you to answer it the way you answer everything. Precisely, without adjustment." She wrote, "Ask." He wrote, "Is this What is between us something you want? Not because I have asked. Not because I have been here for 2 months. Because you want it. A long pause. Then, I want the harbor to be named correctly in the Naval Register. I want my 1819 paper formally acknowledged, which your contact in the Admiralty has the standing to arrange. I want these things because they are right and have been right for 6 years. And yes, since you asked precisely, yes. Don't make me say it again. I find repetition inefficient. He read it. Then he laughed, fully, completely, the way he had apparently been saving up laughing for some time without knowing it. The way it came out of him like a window opened in a room that had been closed too long. 1 year later, October. The Naval Register, Volume 12, Corrected Edition. Asterisk chart reference 7741p. Harbor of São Benedito, South Atlantic. Authenticated and geographically corrected by asterisk and her name, her actual name, in print in the permanent record, the kind of record that does not wash away. The paper, reissued with a formal acknowledgement from the Admiralty Hydrographic Office. 6 years later, she had put it on the shelf above her drafting table without ceremony and returned to the coastal survey she was finishing, which was due on Friday. He was sitting across the room, reading dispatches, in the way that 2 people occupy a shared space when they have stopped performing their occupation of it and are simply there. She looked up at some point and found him already looking at her. She picked up her notepad. Wrote. Slid it across the table. He read it. You are doing the thing again where you look at me as if you are surprised I exist. He wrote back, I am. Every time. I find I am not able to stop being surprised that you exist, or that you are here, or that you have decided I am worth the invoice. She read it. I looked out the window at October. The good October, not the thin, defeated winter kind, the kind that is gold and purposeful and smells of wood smoke and something finishing cleanly. She thought briefly of the first morning. The secretary. The carried notes. Tell her I will double it. All those rooms full of men who had received her words secondhand and translated them, smoothed them, turned her precise and unambiguous no into something softer, something manageable. She had walked into his library and put the words directly in front of him and made him read them himself. She had not adjusted the words. She had not adjusted herself. She had said no in her own handwriting and watched him sit with it for the first time in his life. And he had sat with it, and sat with it again, and come to Cheapside in the wrong coat with an honest answer for the first time. She wrote one last note and pushed it across the table. Stop being surprised. Start being grateful. He read it. The fire was good. The light through the October window was gold and low and honest. Yes, he said aloud, the one word to the room, to her, to the version of himself that had needed 2 months and a dead man's charts and a woman who would not move to understand what wanting something actually felt like. Outside, London went on. Inside, she picked up her pen and returned to the coastline, and the room was quiet and full, and it was entirely exactly enough. The moment that will stay with you. I think you already know which one it is. Not the harbor. Not the letter at midnight. It is the secretary in that first scene, carrying her words across the room and placing them in front of a man who has never before been made to receive a no directly. That image, the note on the desk for words I said no, Your Grace, that is where this whole story lives. That is the seed of everything. If this story found something in you, subscribe, because this channel is for exactly these stories. The ones where the love story is also an argument about power, and the argument is the love story. And for the comments, she could hear. She simply stopped translating herself into softer words for people who could not handle her precision. Do you do this? Make yourself smaller, quieter, less exact, for people who have the power to make your life difficult? And what would it cost you to stop?